I have been king of Valdenmere for 11 years, and in all that time I have never been afraid of anything I could name. I have ridden into battle with 3 armies at my back and felt only the cold clarity of what needed to be done. I have sat at treaty tables with men who wanted me dead and kept my hands still on the wood. I have buried my father, signed the documents that made me sovereign, stood at the edge of the northern cliff where the wind comes off the ice shelf and tries to peel the breath from your chest, and felt nothing I would call fear. I did not know what fear was until I realized I was in love with a seamstress and had spent 2 years doing nothing about it. Her name was Saren. She had come to Valdenmere in the early weeks of my 3rd autumn as king, part of a small group of craftspeople the castle steward had recruited from the valley towns. A silversmith, 2 weavers, a girl who made candles that lasted through the whole of winter without guttering. Saren had come as a seamstress, hired to maintain the household linens and the dress uniforms of the guard. She was given a room in the east wing, a workroom with a window that looked over the inner courtyard, and a wage that was modest and fair. I know all of this because I made it my business to know it. I know it also because my wolf told me, in the way wolves tell their kings things they do not want to hear, not in words, but in the particular quality of stillness that comes over the animal inside you when something in the world has shifted and you have not yet caught up. The first time I saw her was in the corridor outside the Great Hall. I was coming from a council session that had run 2 hours past its allotted time, and I was tired in the specific way of a man who has spent 4 hours arguing about grain levies and is now carrying the argument home in his chest. She was going the other way, carrying a bolt of dark wool folded over both arms, and she was humming, not loudly. Just under her breath, the way a person hums when they are alone and not trying to perform anything for anyone. A small, wandering tune with no particular ambition. She saw me coming, registered the rank, moved immediately to the side of the corridor, and bent her head in the respectful way of castle staff. "My king," she said, and nothing else. I nodded as I passed, that was all. My wolf went quiet in a way I had not felt before, not the alert quiet of sensing danger, the other quiet, the one that means pay attention. I paid attention. I paid attention for 2 years. I am aware of how that sounds. I am a king, not a man who moons silently in corridors over a woman who does not know he exists. I told myself that regularly with some force over the course of those 2 years. I told myself that the wolf's instinct was not necessarily conclusive, that the fated mate bond was a real and documented phenomenon, but that it required confirmation, that I would not disrupt the life of a woman in my employ by descending on her with a claim she had not invited and had no reason to expect. I told myself these things with the same calm authority I applied to grain levies, and they were just as effective. Which is to say, not very. What I did instead of speaking was watch, from the edges of my own hall, from the far end of the corridor when she was crossing it. From the window of the solar on mornings when she came out into the courtyard to shake dust from the finished pieces before hanging them to air, her breath making small clouds in the cold, her arms efficient, and her face tilted up toward the pale winter sky, as though she found something pleasant in the gray of it. I watched her in the way of a man who has decided watching is sufficient, and is wrong about that in a way he does not yet want to admit. I learned her habits. She hummed when she was alone. She did not hum when others were nearby. She went quiet, attentive, careful in the way of someone who has learned not to take up too much space. She ate her meals with the household staff and listened more than she talked, but when she did talk, the people around her laughed or nodded or leaned in slightly, and I noticed that even from across the room. She had a particular fondness for the old wolves, the senior members of the castle's wolf guard, the ones with gray at their muzzles who had been here since my father's time. She brought them scraps from the kitchen on cold evenings. She knew their names. She knew all their names, every wolf in the castle guard, every one. My own wolf, who had not been particularly sociable in the 11 years of my kingship, developed a habit of placing himself near the east corridor on evenings when Saren made her rounds with the kitchen scraps. I did not comment on this. I pretended, with diminishing success, not to notice. There were moments, many of them, when I could have spoken. When she brought a repaired dress uniform to my study and laid it over the chair with a quiet word about the work done, and I thanked her, and she turned to go, and my wolf surged against my ribs with an urgency that took my breath, and I said nothing. When I passed her in the courtyard and she looked up from the cloth she was hanging, and met my eyes for a half-second with an expression I could not read. Neutral, careful. The expression of a person who is good at being invisible, and I looked back at her and also said nothing. When she laughed at something one of the old wolves said, a real laugh, unguarded, and the sound of it went through me like a bell struck in a quiet room, and I turned away and went back inside. I am not proud of any of this. My wolf, by the end of the second year, had ceased to be subtle about his feelings. He paced. He circled. On the mornings I took him to the northern court for the guards' training runs, he performed his duties with a distracted competence that my captain noticed and mentioned to me with the careful neutrality of a man who knows when not to ask questions. My wolf was not pacing because he was unhappy. He was pacing because he had made a decision and was waiting, with decreasing patience, for the rest of me to make the same one. I had very nearly decided to speak. I had gone as far as identifying the right moment, not in the corridor, not in passing, but a proper conversation, a private one, where I could say what needed to be said without it being a disruption to her work or a command from her king that she would feel she could not refuse. I had thought about it with the same methodical attention I gave to military planning. I had decided on the small council antechamber after the morning session when the castle was quieter. I had decided what I would say, not a declaration delivered from a throne, but something simpler, something honest. I have been aware of you for some time. My wolf chose you before I had the sense to say so. I am saying so now. I had it planned, and then Lord Aldwin arrived. He came for the Winter Trade Summit, Valdenmir's annual negotiation with the southern territories over the price of northern wool, which Aldwin's pack controlled the market routes for. He was a reasonable lord on trade matters. He was also, as it turned out, a man who noticed things quickly, and one of the things he noticed within his first 24 hours in my castle was Saren. I knew it had happened before I saw it directly. My wolf felt it first, a new alertness, a tightening, the particular quality of attention that is not quite threat recognition, but is close enough that my hand went to the arm of my chair during a council session and gripped it without my telling it to. I saw it that evening. Aldwin had come down from his rooms earlier than the formal dinner hour and was in the corridor outside the great hall, and Saren was there too, carrying the finished banner she'd been repairing all week, the ceremonial Valdenmir Wolfan star, 8 feet of heavy embroidered wool. It was unwieldy, and she was managing it carefully, one end draped over her shoulder, her chin holding the middle, her hands keeping the trailing edge off the floor. Aldwin, to his credit, had not hesitated. He had stepped forward immediately and taken the end she was struggling with, and they had carried it between them to the hall door. I watched from the far end of the corridor. He said something, she answered. He said something else, and she laughed, not the unguarded laugh I knew from the courtyard, but something smaller and more careful, the laugh a person gives when they are pleased but keeping their guard. He was looking at her with the particular attention of a man who has decided he is interested, and Saren, for her part, was not discouraging him. She was being careful and polite, as she was with everyone, but she was also not walking away. My wolf did not pace. He went absolutely still, the stillness that is worse than pacing. I went in to dinner. Over the following 3 days, Aldwin was consistent. He was not crass about it. He was a lord with reasonable manners, and he understood the lines of propriety within a host's castle. He did not accost her. He was simply present wherever she happened to be, in the way of a man who has engineered proximity without making it obvious. He brought her a small gift on the second morning, a length of ribbon from the southern market, deep blue, the kind that is difficult to source this far north, and presented it to her in the corridor outside the workroom with a courteous bow, as though she were a lady of rank and he was paying his proper respects. I was told about this by my wolf before I saw it directly, and then I saw it when I rounded the corner because I had no good reason to be in that part of the castle at that hour, and I was there anyway. She held the ribbon in both hands and looked at it and then at him, and I could not see her face from where I stood, but I could see the set of her shoulders, surprised, a little uncertain, not unpleased. She said something quiet. He smiled. She went back inside. My wolf made a sound in the back of my throat that I stopped before it became audible. That evening I did not sleep well. I lay in the dark of my chamber and listened to the wind off the ice shelf and told myself, with a firmness I was aware was failing, that Saren was a free person with the absolute right to accept a ribbon from a lord if she chose to, that I had no claim on her I had ever expressed, that 2 years of watching from corridors, and saying nothing constituted not a relationship, but a prolonged failure of nerve on my part. And that if Aldwin could simply walk up to her and hand her a ribbon, and make her laugh then, perhaps the problem had never been about timing. The problem, my wolf informed me from somewhere in my chest, was that I had confused patience with permission to do nothing. I lay there for a while considering that. By the third morning, I had decided to speak to her before the summit dinner. The antechamber plan was abandoned. I would simply find her wherever she was and say what I had been failing to say for 2 years, and I would do it today. I did not find her before the summit dinner. I found her at the summit dinner. The Great Hall of Valdenmere is a long room. Hearthfire runs the length of it, iron grates every 12 feet, and in winter the light they cast is amber and shifting and warm. The walls hold the wolf and star banners. Saren's repaired one was up now, hung that morning, its silver stitching catching the firelight, and the long tables run parallel to the hearths, with the high table at the north end where I sit. The summit dinners were formal affairs. The castle's senior staff attended the back of the hall. It was custom in Valdenmere, going back to my grandfather's time, that the craftspeople and senior household staff were present at formal dinners, not eating with the lords but present at the room's edge, part of the ceremony of the house. Saren was there near the east wall, in the plain dark dress she wore to formal occasions, her hair put up simply. She was standing with 2 of the older weavers, listening to something one of them was saying. Aldwin had placed himself at the southern trade table, which was correct for his rank. He was 15 feet from Saren. I noticed the angle of his attention from the moment he sat down. The dinner progressed. Trade agreements were discussed over the fish course. Numbers were negotiated over the roast. By the time the tables were cleared for the dancing portion of the evening, another Valdenmere custom, a late winter revel that preceded the final signing ceremony, I had said everything that needed to be said to Aldwin's trade delegation about wool prices and root fees, and I was watching the room with the specific restlessness of a man who has somewhere he needs to be and cannot seem to get there. Then Aldwin stood up. He was not a man who lacked social confidence. He walked across the hall, past the trade table, past the wolf guard, past the cluster of senior staff near the east wall, and he stopped in front of Saren, and he bowed, and he held out his hand, and he said something I was too far away to hear. I heard the word dance. Saren looked at his hand. She glanced briefly at the older woman beside her, a small checking motion, the instinct of a person seeking permission or reassurance, I could not tell which. She looked back at Aldwin. I was on my feet before I understood that I was going to stand. The hall is a long room, but I have a king's stride, and I covered the distance in less time than it takes to describe. I was aware of heads turning, the hall noticing the king crossing it at speed, which is not something that goes unnoticed, and I did not care about that at all, not even slightly, for the first time in 11 years of carefully managed public conduct. I did not run, I walked. But I walked like a man who has finally decided something after 2 years of not deciding it, and that has its own particular velocity. I stopped at Saren's shoulder. Aldwin looked at me. The older weaver looked at me. The nearby section of the hall, which had caught the movement in the way that halls do, went quiet in a radius of about 20 feet. I looked at Aldwin. I said, with the full, even calm of a king who has made a decision and is no longer conflicted about it, "She is not available." 4 words. I heard them land. I heard the particular quality of silence that follows 4 words delivered in that tone in that room. Aldwin held my gaze for a moment. He was not a foolish man, and he read what was in my face with the competence of someone experienced in reading the faces of powerful men. And then he bowed, a correct and unhurried bow, and he said, "My king," and he went back to his table. I did not watch him go. I looked at Saren. She was looking up at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before, not the careful neutral, not the polite composure. Something else, something unguarded, the way she looked when she was alone in the courtyard and didn't know anyone was watching. Open, uncertain, trying to understand what had just happened. I said quietly enough that only she could hear, "Come with me." Not a command. The way you say something when you have finally stopped pretending you are neutral about it. She came with me. The antechamber off the great hall is a small stone room, 2 chairs, a low table, a candle in an iron bracket, a window that looks onto the inner ward. I have had difficult conversations in that room. I have signed difficult documents there. I had planned to have a particular conversation there 3 days ago and had not managed it. I closed the door. The sounds of the hall became distant and muffled. The candle was the only light. Saren stood in the center of the room and looked at me with that same open, uncertain expression, and I could see her trying to organize herself, trying to find the careful posture. And for the first time in 2 years, I did not want her to find it. I did not want the careful composure that she wore in public. I had spent 2 years watching for the moments when she didn't wear it, and I was too tired of waiting to want anything other than the truth of her now. I said I should have said something a long time before tonight. She was quiet, waiting. You came to Valdenmere 2 years ago, I said. You came with the autumn craftspeople, and you were given the workroom in the east wing, and you were humming in the corridor on the third day when I first walked past you, and my wolf went still in a way I recognized and did not know what to do with. Something moved across her face. She said very carefully, "My king." "Kalen," I said, "please." Another pause. She said, "Kalen," and even she could hear that it was different. My name in her mouth without the title. I had been Kalen to exactly 4 people in my adult life, and she was not one of them, and suddenly I wanted her to be. "I know your habits," I said, because I had decided that honesty was the only thing left, and I was going to commit to it entirely. "I know you hum when you are alone and go quiet when others are near. I know you bring scraps to the older wolves on cold evenings, and you know every one of their names. I know you tilt your face up in the courtyard on gray mornings, as though you are looking for something pleasant in the cold. I know you eat your meals quietly and listen, and when you speak, people lean toward you, and I have noticed that from across the room on more occasions than I can count." She was very still. Her hands, which she had been holding loosely at her sides, the way she held them when she was trying not to fidget, had gone completely quiet. "I watched you from corridors for 2 years, I said. I told myself I was being careful, I was being a coward, and tonight a man walked across my hall and held his hand out to you, and something in me that has been very patient for a very long time stopped being patient, and I am sorry that it required that to make me move." The candle between us threw warm, unsteady light across her face. I watched her take a breath. She said, "You know my name. I have known your name since your 3rd day here. You've never," she stopped, started again. "In 2 years, you've never spoken to you beyond formal acknowledgement. I know." I held her gaze. "I am speaking now." She looked at me for a long moment, not the careful look, the real one. I had been trying to see that look from a safe distance for 2 years, and now it was 6 feet away from me in a candle-lit antechamber, and I stayed very still and let her look. "Why didn't you?" she said, not accusatory, genuinely asking. I thought about giving her the measured answer, the one about propriety and the difficulty of a king approaching a member of his household staff without it carrying the weight of authority. I thought about all the reasonable things I had told myself for 2 years. I said, "Because you were content, and I could see it from the edges of my hall, and I didn't know how to begin a conversation about what I felt without making it a disruption to a life that was quietly working. And I was afraid," I said, "that you would find it strange. That I would have watched you for 2 years and say so, and you would look at me the way people look at kings who have said something unexpected and complicated. And you would be kind about it because you are kind about everything. And I would spend the rest of my life knowing I had made it strange between us." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I have been invisible here. Not to me, never for a single day." Her breath came out slowly. "The wolves," she said, "the ones near the east corridor. They started coming around about 6 months after I arrived. I thought they just liked the scraps." "They liked you," I said. "My wolf liked you. He's been trying to communicate that with increasing subtlety for a 1.5 years. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, the antechamber of a smile, a loosening. "The quiet one," she said. "The big gray one who stays near the east door on evenings. That's him. He doesn't take the scraps," she said. "He just sits nearby." "Yes," I said. "That's about how I've been handling it, too." She did smile then. Small, uncertain, but real, the real smile, the one she wore in the courtyard when nobody was watching. And something in my chest, which had been held carefully in check for 2 years with the same controlled discipline I applied to everything else, simply let go. I said, "My wolf chose you. I believe I chose you at approximately the same time and have been failing to say so for 2 years. I am saying so now. I would like if you are willing to have this conversation, the real one, the whole one, and not go back into that hall until we've had it. She looked at me for a long time. The candle threw its unsteady light. Outside, distantly, I could hear the hall music starting up, the low hum of the revel. She said, "What does your wolf think is happening right now?" "He thinks," I said, "that it's about time." She looked at me and the smile went wider and she said, "Sit down, Kaelin." We sat in the antechamber for 2 hours. Not everything that needs to be said between two people who have not spoken honestly for 2 years can be said in 2 hours, but you can say the essential things, the ones that change the shape of the room. I told her about the bond, what it was, what it meant, what my wolf had been telling me since the corridor outside the great hall on her 3rd day. I explained it the way you explain a thing to a person who deserves the full truth of it, not edited for reception. She was quiet while I spoke. She asked questions, good ones, precise ones, the questions of someone who is listening carefully and not just waiting for their turn. She told me what it had been like, the 2 years. The East Wing room, the workroom, the satisfaction of the work itself. She was honest about that. She had loved the work. The castle's linens were a fascinating project. Some of them a century old and held together by previous seamstresses, repairs layered on repairs. A kind of textile history she found genuinely absorbing. She told me about the older wolves, about learning their names one by one, because she liked to know the names of the creatures who chose to spend time near her. She told me about the gray one outside the east door. She had named him privately, she said, and then looked slightly embarrassed about it. "What did you call him?" I said. She said, with the expression of someone confessing something they know is slightly absurd, "Sentinel." My wolf, hearing this from wherever he was in the castle, made a sound of profound satisfaction that I felt in my sternum. "He approves," I said. She laughed, the real laugh, the unguarded one, the one I had been trying not to love from a corridor for 2 years. And it went through me exactly as it always had, like a bell in a quiet room, and this time I did not turn away from it. I asked her what she wanted. Not what she thought was appropriate, not what she thought a king expected her to want, what she actually wanted. She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who has not been asked that question very often and is taking it seriously. She said she wanted to keep working. She said the embroidery was unfinished. There were 3 more ceremonial banners that needed repair, and the winter dress uniforms for the spring honor guard needed to be started, and she was in the middle of a project with the archive linens that she thought was going to be interesting. She said this, and then she caught herself and said, "Is that?" And I said, "Yes, of course, all of it. The work stays, everything you want stays." She looked at me carefully. "That's not a usual thing. For a king's fated mate." "No," I said, "I don't intend to be usual about it." She considered that. Then she said the ribbon was a nice gesture, Aldwin's. "I know," I said evenly. "You didn't like it." "Not even slightly," I said. She smiled again. Then she said, "You said 4 words." "Yes." "In front of the whole hall." "Yes." She looked at the candle for a moment. Then she looked at me. "You've been standing in corridors for 2 years," she said, "and you chose that as your moment." "My wolf had been patient for a year and a half," I said. "He was not interested in patience anymore." "And you?" I thought about the question honestly, about what I had been and what I intended to be going forward, and about the difference between the two, and about 2 years of careful restraint that had been, in the end, a different kind of failing. "I would like to be different," I said, "from here." The candle had burned down by a third. Outside, the revel was still going. I could hear the music, the low beat of it, the occasional swell of voices. Aldwin would have made his peace with the evening's events. He was a pragmatic man. The hall would be speculating. My captain would be managing the speculation with the practiced diplomacy of a man who had worked for me for 8 years. None of it felt urgent. Saren was quiet for a moment, looking at the candle. Then she looked at me with the real look, the unguarded one I had been watching from a distance for 2 years, and she said, "Tell me one more thing." "Anything," I said. "In 2 years, was there a moment when you almost said something?" I thought about it. About the study, the repaired dress uniform draped over the chair. About the courtyard and the half-second of eye contact, and the expression I could not read. About the corridor and the humming and the way she had gone quiet when she saw me coming and moved to the side. "There were many," I said. "Which one were you closest?" I said 6 weeks ago. You brought the repaired winter banner to the study. You laid it on the chair and said, the silver thread was replaced in 4 places, the rest is original, and you turned to leave. And my wolf was, I stopped. He was very insistent, and I called your name. She looked at me. You called my name. You'd already reached the door, I said. I said your name, and you turned, and I looked at you for a moment, and then I said thank you for the care you took. And you said, of course, my king, and you left. She was quiet. I was going to say something else, I said. I know, she said softly. I thought, she stopped. I thought you might have been going to say something else. I went back to the workroom and I sat down and I thought about it for a while. I held very still. What did you think? She said, I thought I was imagining things, that it wasn't, that I was making it into something it wasn't because I wanted to. A pause. I went back to work. I'm sorry, I said, that I let you walk out of that room. She looked at me for a long moment. Outside, the music was still going. The candle was warm between us. She said, I'm still here, Kaylin. We went back into the hall an hour before the revel ended. I did not make a speech. I did not stop the music. I walked back into the great hall of Valdenmere beside Saren, and I offered her my arm as we came through the door, and she took it, and that was all that needed to happen. The hall saw it. Halls always see. The understanding moved through the room in the way of water finding level, quietly, inevitably, without anyone announcing it. My captain caught my eye from near the south door and gave me the small nod of a man who is not surprised and is also deeply relieved. Aldwyn, to his credit, raised his cup from across the hall in a gesture that was entirely gracious and cost him nothing at all. I acknowledged it with a nod. We would have no difficulty with the wool agreements. The older wolves along the east wall watched Saren come in on my arm, and then looked at each other in the way of creatures who have known something for a long time and are merely waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Sentinel, my gray wolf, her sentinel, came in from the corridor, walked the length of the hall with his unhurried pace, and settled at her feet with a finality that made several of the trade delegates visibly recalibrate something. Saren looked down at him. She looked up at me. He's never done that before, she said. In the hall. He's been waiting, I said, for a reason too. She put her hand on his head, the way she did in the corridor with the scraps, familiar and easy, and he closed his eyes, and the great hall of Valdenmere continued its revel around us with the new knowledge that something had shifted, quietly and finally, in the order of things. The Winter Trade Summit closed the following morning. Aldwyn's delegation signed the wool agreements, which were fair to both territories, and had always been going to be fair because Aldwyn was a reasonable man who understood that good trade relationships outlast individual seasons. He shook my hand in the front courtyard, nodded to Saren, who was standing at the workroom window above, visible, not hiding, and departed with his party through the castle gate. There was no ceremony to announce what had happened. I did not call the court together and deliver a proclamation. I have found in 11 years of kingship that the things which need proclaiming are usually the things that are not yet secure, and the things that are secure do not need proclaiming, they simply become true, and then they are true, and then they have always been true, and eventually people forget that there was a time before them. Saren finished the archive linen project. She started the spring honor guard uniforms. She moved by degrees from the east wing room to the rooms adjacent to my own, not because I commanded it, but because we had taken to talking in the evenings, the two of us and Sentinel and the pair of younger wolves who had decided they also had opinions about this situation. And at some point, the distance from her room to the conversation had become a nuisance, and she had solved the nuisance practically, as she solved most things. The bond settled, the way bonds settle, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small mornings. The way I knew her tea before she asked for it. The way she knew without looking up from her work when I had come into the room. The way Sentinel distributed himself between us with perfect equity, his head on her knee and his tail at my feet, as though he had been managing exactly this arrangement since the beginning of things. The court adapted. Courts always adapt. They are made of people who understand that the order of things shifts and that adjusting to the shift is what keeps them relevant. The household staff, who had known Saren for 2 years, adapted with particular warmth. Several of them, I learned later, had been hoping for this outcome with more specificity than I had been giving the situation credit for. The older weavers had apparently placed something resembling a wager on it, the details of which Saren told me with the particular expression of a person who is reporting something scandalous, and also finds it entirely too satisfying. There was a formal ceremony in the spring, when the flowers came back to the northern meadow and the days grew long enough to be called proper days again. I stood at the front of the great hall and she stood beside me, and Sentinel sat between us in the way he had apparently decided was his permanent post, and I put my hand on hers before the court, the way I had wanted to put my hand on hers in that corridor for 2 years. She was wearing a dress she had made herself. I had offered there were seamstresses, she was the seamstress. The irony was not lost on either of us, and she had said, with the small, firm practicality that I had come to love as much as the humming, that she would rather do it herself. The dress was dark winter blue, the color of the northern sky an hour before dark, with silver thread at the collar and cuffs that I recognized as her stitching. She wore no jewels except the mate mark, which had risen on her wrist the night in the antechamber when we had finally said what needed to be said. A silver-blue spiral that looked, in certain lights, like a small version of the Wolfan star she had repaired and hung in the hall. She had noticed that, and told me about it with the quiet pleasure of someone who finds the symmetry of things genuinely satisfying. The court bowed, not because I commanded it, I did not, but because she was there and she was unambiguous, and 2 years of small invisible constancy had made itself visible all at once, and the hall understood, in the way halls understand these things, what it was bowing to. Saren did not change. That is the thing I want most to say about her, looking back. She kept working. She kept the embroidery, the linens, the archive project, the honor guard uniforms. She kept bringing scraps to the old wolves on cold evenings, and she kept knowing their names, and she kept humming in the rooms when she thought she was alone, that small wandering tune with no particular ambition, until she learned, with a mixture of emotions she chose not to fully articulate, that she had never actually been alone when she was humming because I had been in the habit of listening through doors for 2 years and was not prepared to stop. She told me with great precision what she thought about that. I told her she was welcome to begin listening at my doors if it would balance the ledger. She said she had already been doing that. I thought about this for a moment, and then I laughed, a real one, unguarded, the kind I only have in rooms with no one watching. And she looked at me with the expression I had spent 2 years trying to see from a safe distance, the open, unguarded, real one, and she said, "There it is, the way you say something when you have been waiting for it and are glad it has arrived." Sentinel, who was lying across both our feet in the study doorway, made a sound of deep contentment. I said, "What did you hear in 2 years of listening at doors?" She said, "Enough to know you were worth waiting for." The winter light came in low through the study window and lay across the floor, and the hall beyond us was quiet, and Saren was here, had been here, in this castle, within reach of this room, for 2 years of mornings. And I thought about all the time that had not been wasted, exactly, but had been spent at a careful distance that had never been quite as much distance as I'd told myself it was. "Saren," I said. She looked at me. "I will not stand in corridors anymore." She reached over and took my hand, the mate mark warm between our palms, and she said, "I know, I'll hold you to that." The fire in the grate caught and settled. Outside, the northern wind came off the ice shelf, that wind I have known since boyhood that tries to peel the breath from your chest. Inside, it was warm. It had been warm in this castle for 2 years without my understanding what was making it warm. I understood now,